Good evening and welcome to episode 52 of the Jacksonian. As I'm yours truly, Jackson Johnson, and I have with me is the director of recruiting, the host of Ole Miss Live with Bart Rogers on Ole Miss at the Voice of College Football, and an amazing what someone who brings out an amazing wealth of knowledge on the Ole Miss Rebels, the one and only herself, LeeAnn Herring, as we go over our
Ex-
take on what's going on with the Ole Miss Rebels, especially on what happened against South Carolina, what's been going on so far in 2024, and
Uh,
yeah.
no, go ahead. You were. Thank you so much for that great introduction. That was very humbling. I really appreciate it. Man, talk about we're what 7 weeks in, Jackson. And man, what a roller coaster it's been. I know for those Crimson Tide. I hope you're checking on all those on all your friends down in Tuscaloosa, and I'm sure the Tennessee Vols feel just the same. Now, the Ole Miss Rebels were a little bit luckier this week. Definitely a lot better showing, a lot of bit more ease on a tough road challenge out in South Carolina, and then they have to head quick turnover heading to Baton Rouge in week 7. But I don't know about you, but we're kind of talking about it before we went on the air. Those week games in week 6, it always are kind of the low key, not the marquee matchups. I don't know about you, but I always think that those tend to be the crazier weeks, and we saw so much happen. And I mean, week 7, a lot of big matchups where we have Texas OU, of course, Red River rivalry, LSU, Ole Miss. I mean, there's just a lot of big games. So week 6, if week 6 was crazy, I think week 7 is going to be even crazier.
Oh, and there's going to be some games where we see upsets where we least expect them. It honestly feels like that because, I mean, last week was a sloppy week, which something I always tell people that, like how on Game of Thrones, winter is coming? Well, when there's a sloppy week of college football, upsets are coming.
Exactly, because like you said, a lot of the times, I talked about it when, with the unfortunate loss to Ole Miss to Kentucky at home, you know, a couple weeks ago. I think a lot of people didn't expect that from Kentucky, but you got to hand it to Mark Stoops and what he did. That defense really is something sensational. They really are something. I think a lot of people were stuck back in the way Kentucky used to be when it used to be just a basketball state, and I assure you, it's no longer just a basketball state. But I think that Kentucky just really was a lot better prepared, and I think that this week, we saw the Rebels that we're used to seeing because I think they were back on SEC time when I was doing, our show last week. I talked about us kind of being in Margaritaville because when you're playing teams like Georgia Southern, when you're playing teams like Wake Forest, especially being an SEC team as Ole Miss is, you have to come up with a completely different schematic to be able to approach those offenses and defense. It's not something you see every day. So I think that kind of lingered on into the thing. But as you can see, what the Rebels did in South Carolina, it wasn't pretty, but again, it was a lot cleaner than what we saw against Kentucky at home on the road. And I can expect now that we're back on SEC time. Lane Kiffin and his ball club are definitely ready to enter a big week and a big matchup. But I mean, there's a lot of good things we saw in South Carolina, a lot of things that we definitely have to improve on. I mean, you mentioned it, especially in weeks, not even when you have marquee matchups. As we have this expanded playoff, Jackson, I really believe that it's going to come down to the details. A lot of times we saw a lot. I feel like we've seen a lot more games be a lot closer than expected. A lot of them have come down to field goals. But man, penalties have played a big role in some of the difference makers, especially for the Ole Miss Rebels. That's something that they couldn't shake. Now they did do a better job of it in South Carolina, limiting penalties. But man, that's really been a thorn in a lot of these teams that naturally we don't see a lot of issues. But again, like I said, as we play different teams, any week is an upset week, especially with things are going now. And like I said, a lot of surprises. When Vandy can come upset, I mean, I have to apologize to Vandy for not giving credit, but man, nobody thought that they could pull it off. And that Tennessee Arkansas upset, Mark kind of looked at me a little crazy, but I called it that Arkansas was not only going to cover, but I do believe at home. And we talked about it before the show. I've never seen Nico. I mean, one of the most prolific passers coming out of high school, as good as paper, has really done something for Tennessee. I've never seen that kid so shaken, and I really do equate that to Sam Pittman and what the adjustments they made on defense, especially having those 3 corners in the backfield, limiting Nico and just that pressure in the underline really, really made it difficult for Tennessee. So like I said, week 12 is another crazy week ahead, but yeah, there's a lot to talk about. So let's get to it.
Oh, for sure. But before we start off with the introduction, I just gotta ask you, what are the winning lottery numbers?
I wish I knew. You could tell me that. I always like to go. Some of my favorite numbers are 14 because that's my oldest son's birthday. I always like to go with 13 because everyone always thinks it's unlucky, and then 75 has always been kind of a cool number for me. So yeah, those are. I don't know if you can use them in the Powerball lottery, whatever you can. Those are my number. Those are my go-to numbers. So maybe one day they'll hit.
Well, note to self: use next time I go to Tennessee, use those numbers for especially for lottery. But for those who don't know about you, try to tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Well, my best and biggest job, aside from being director of recruiting at the awesome Rebel Walk, of course, is being a mom to four awesome future All Americans. Got two boys, two girls. Future, hopefully, gymnastics. Some my daughters want to go to. One wants to go to Georgia. One wants to go to Brown and follow in mom's footsteps. And my boys want to go play lacrosse. One wants to go to Brown, and one hopes that Ole Miss will have a D1 lacrosse program. So I spend my time between that and, like I said, I was a traditional beat writer, graduated from Brown University, did cheerleading there, worked in the football team as an equipment manager, kind of where I got my start, and then worked my way up with some amazing coaches and staff that kind of just took me under their wing. Did a brief stint at ESPN, then decided that I was not going to do law school and just kind of in a one of my mentors, actually at Kentucky, Larry Vaught, brought me on to write for his paper, Danville Advocate Messenger. So that's really where I got my start at the University of Kentucky, covering basketball, then football, then got a chance to come back full circle down south with Ole Miss and did a stint in the NFL and came back to Evie was gracious enough to bring me on staff to start staff writing and doing, your traditional thing. And then she's like, you know what, let's do some recruiting. And that's really what I've always wanted to do. I've really appreciated being a former athlete myself, the recruitment process, especially at the high school level. So most Friday nights and Thursdays, I'm around Texas and Georgia and some of the other places in the South, looking at some of our top targets and always looking for new talent. That's one of my favorite things when you go, looking for the kids that you always see, especially in Texas. There's no shortage of talent. When you're coming to Texas or in places like Georgia, you're always going to find you got, the kids you're always going to talk about. But my favorite thing is when you go to a game and then you witness this kid that's just, out of the block. I just came back from Tascasita. Of course, there's a big Texas matchup against Summer Creek. There's a kid that we're recruiting. We're actually recruiting him as a running back, but believe it or not, he's about a little bit higher than 5'9" and has an arm and is playing quarterback at Tascasita. And but man, I've never seen such a kid that just can do something. Not many running backs, especially at that kind of program. I believe they're number 24 in the country and went 5-0, and number 4 team in Texas. You never see many running backs being the signal caller for that, but it's worked out really well. Game went down to the wire, less than a minute. Carde Matt carried the game along with that offensive line, made some big plays, and sent Summer Creek unfortunately home. But like I said, that's a little bit about me. Like I said, most of the times I'm either doing recruiting or being a mom to four awesome future All Americans and coaching lacrosse too.
Oh, there you go. I'm looking forward to watching those All Americans on television one of these days, or on my phone, or on the computer.
I hope so too. Like I said, they work out of a really great program out in Bernie, Texas, and they love football. Don't get me wrong, my boys are they love Lane Kiffin, and they are Ole Miss Rebels. They were all born in Oxford, Mississippi, so even though they're in Texas, they always are proud and they to be Ole Miss Rebels. And they definitely my boys definitely love Jackson Dart and all that kind of stuff. So lot of good guys to roll. But yeah, they want to play lacrosse and they want to play professional lacrosse. So I'm all about supporting that dream. But yeah, no, it's super exciting. But they definitely love some Ole Miss Rebels. I know during Kentucky week, it was funny. My oldest, he came up to me, WM, but we call him Hatfield, and he was like, "Mom, what happened? We shouldn't have lost to Kentucky." And he was just, I was just like, oh my gosh, I was just like, it is so in your blood to be an Ole Miss Rebel. He was just so disappointed by the game, but he's like, you know what? He's like, we're gonna bounce back, Mom. I know that Coach Kiff's got us. I know that our defense and everything. So you can tell they've definitely been around me a little too much, and that Oxford blood runs deep in their veins.
I don't think he's gonna like how long the conference title drought has been.
Oh, I know that. I know that. He's only 9 years old. So yeah.
So it's like the last time Ole Miss won a conference title or won a national title as well, our grandparents were kids looking forward to Gunsmoke and Bonanza.
Exactly, exactly. So hopefully, maybe in his lifetime, it looks like they may be very close to see it. But like I said, they got a gauntlet to get through. But it is definitely one of the most manageable teams that Lane Kiffin has put together along with his staff. I mean, in 5 years, what he's done, I think a lot of people don't realize in the SEC just how long it really takes to build a dynasty. Especially in this age of NIL and recruiting. Just so many things have shifted since when I started in just being a sports writer. And, now with recruiting and everything, it's just like, especially with the high school form of recruiting, there's just so many factors that play in now that really can make or break a roster.
Well, and a lot of people talked about Alabama Vanderbilt, of course. And a lot of people talked about Tennessee, Arkansas, Michigan getting upset by Washington, and USC getting upset by Minnesota on Saturday night, and Miami Cal. But a lot of people did not even they didn't even think about Ole Miss, South Carolina, or even Florida, Central Florida, for that matter. You know, wanted to go over a little bit about the takeaways on Ole Miss, South Carolina, and also wanted to go over a little bit about no news or no attention being a good thing for Billy Napier, because he's on quite a hot seat. And a lot of people have been talking about whether is Lane Kiffin going to go Gainesville, is he going to shoot for another opportunity at Florida? But I don't know. It's like he seems all right at Ole Miss. He seems happier there, and plus, I don't see anybody at Ole Miss looking to throw him out of the house like Jazz on Fresh Prince of Bel Air because no SEC title. That's not happening.
Yeah, just touching base on that, we've kind of talked about it over the weeks, Mark and I, just when it first came out, Billy Napier just is definitely in a hot seat. DJ Lagway has done a phenomenal job. He's another kid I helped recruit when he was, Ole Miss was looking at him. He's out of Willis, Texas. I always say there's something in that Willis water, and he's doing a great job in there. A lot of those kids we see last night, there's a lot of blue chip kids that have come out, some top programs that are trying. But you can say what you want about Billy Napier, but there's just a lot of distress that's going on in that Florida administration. Billy Napier, yes, he's the coach and he's going to take a lot of the heat, but there's so much more wrong that's going on in Florida that doesn't make it a enticing job. And I think too that's why Lane would stay put. I can't speak for Coach Kiffin, but one thing sure, he's definitely got a good thing here in Oxford. And I feel like in a place like Florida, it's one of those places where there's a lot more outside factors like the boosters that I've kind of mentioned and everything, where I feel like in Oxford right now, Lane has a good repertoire with the boosters. They're involved with the collective that's being built, what he's built. And I feel like he's got a better hold and of things in Oxford than he would in a place like Florida, because I think he would have to he would have to let go of a lot more control. And sometimes, in a place like Florida, boosters are very influential. And, that's not necessarily a bad thing. You want your boosters involved, you want them to a certain degree, but at the extent where they start infringing on you being able to coach, they want you to win titles, but then they want to have a say, or they want to infringe on coaching and what you should do and what you should not. I think that's a big problem that we're seeing at Florida. And I feel like that's why a lot of people aren't jumping at that job. Just like a lot of people weren't jumping at the Texas job, when Will Muschamp was the coach in waiting, and then the job at Florida. Historically, Florida's been a job that you want to go to because Florida has always been seen as this prestigious job where you can go to win. But at the end of the day, it's like I say, you can have all the money in the world being a Florida Gator. You can provide all these endorsements, but money is not going to be the sole factor in building a championship team. And I think that's what people mistake. Lane Kiffin is a heck of a coach, and he would bring a heck of a staff to Florida. That is not going to change the problems that are going on at Florida. That is not going to make a championship or an SEC conference team overnight. On the contrary, like I said, it's taken Lane 5 years to be able to have his collective, to have his NIL, to have his staff, his players, and everything buy into a culture. I mean, that was the teams that he inherited was not the best team to work with. Nobody wants to inherit that team. But again, I think that a lot of people expect when you're in the SEC, it's a business and you want to win and you want to win right away. But the way things have changed in the landscape of the game, it doesn't happen overnight. So when Will Muschamp, like I said, going back to that, he could have stayed at Texas. And I think that
He
he would have
should
had a
have.
lot of success at Texas because he was already being groomed. I mean, he already knew that. I mean, it was the perfect job. But again, when Florida called, because Florida on paper looks really great, but when you got out there, it's a mess. And look at what happened to a coach like him, and look at what happens to every big coach that's gone over there. It's not always greener on the other side. It's not always greener pastures. Again, Florida's a job that looks great on paper, but with it comes a lot of stipulations. And again, just like the Texas job, a lot of people wondered why Nick Saban didn't jump on that job. Well, again, you have to deal with a lot of boosters when you're in a program like Texas or Texas A&M. They're very influential. And a coach like Nick Saban, a coach like Kiffin, they want a hold of their thing. You want us to win championships? Well, you got to let me have a hold of your chief. They don't want to deal with a bunch of Jerry Joneses, telling them how they should run a ball club. We've seen how that's worked real well for the Cowboys. Heck,
Oh
we
yeah.
saw how it worked for Texas A&M. If you want to give a collegiate example, I mean that roster that Texas A&M built a couple years ago with Jimbo Fisher, probably one of the best not only in program history but probably in college football. And look how quickly that fell apart. There was a mass exodus. It was a dumpster fire. And I
I
believe
mean,
right
the
now,
players,
yeah,
they're like a few players, caught smoking dope before the start of the South Carolina game in 2022. And I can tell you right now, I thought to myself, if Coach Saban saw that, he'd have made them run laps.
you know, yeah, and there's like I said, and now in the day and age that we're going on, you can't control all these young boys' actions because they're still at the end of the day, they're young kids, and especially in the age of NIL when they have so much money thrown at them right now. And and a lot of these kids we have to remember, at a time in a time like this, I can imagine some of these Florida kids are getting recruited right now to hit that transfer portal. I mean, we saw it yesterday with Alabama. Jam Otis. He's a Mississippi kid who's heavily recruited by Ole Miss. Went out to Alabama. Turns out, like you said, he's going to redshirt. He's going to come home. Is he going to come home? Ole Miss is going to be on that because if I'm Lane Kiffin, if I'm Pete Golden, I'm already making those calls. So it's just a different day and age. But like I said, as far as I feel like Kiffin going to Florida, I just don't see it in the cards right now. And to put it all on Billy Napier, you can't just put it all on the coach. I mean, he's historically the one who's going to get the you know the most of it because he's the coach. But there's so many wrong things going on at Florida because it hasn't been the program that people think it's been. It's just like when you think of Miami, people are still stuck in how good Miami was during the 80s and 90s, but it's not there. Same thing with Florida. If it was so good in reality more than it is so on paper, you still wouldn't be playing, Dan Mullen's buyout. So I just think that there's just too many other factors outside football that need to be cleaned up before they start talking about going to get a high profile coach that they think that's a fix. Like I joked with Mark on when we brought it up for the first time. You could bring Jesus Christ in there to Florida right now to Gainesville. It's not going to fix the swamp right
Oh,
now.
they fire him for not being more like Nick Saban. It's like, oh, well,
Yeah.
Nick Saban doesn't have that haircut. Nick Saban doesn't have this. Nick Saban doesn't have. It's like, oh my god. Ugh.
And I think that's the big problem with
It's
programs. And
like
I think
some
that's
people
what
don't even watch college football when they do that crap.
And I think too when teams really find success is when they find their own identity, and I think that that's what Ole Miss has done. I think Lane Kiffin, like you said, he's an outside the box thinker. He makes his own table, and I think that's what's made Ole Miss successful. For so long, we were stuck in this. We've always had really good teams. We've always had the capability, but we've never clicked as a team as a whole. Coaching staff translated on the field, and I think when teams start trying to be Alabamas and LSU's or Ohio States and they find their own identity, I feel like they really excel. So it's really hard when you want your coach to be somewhat to emulate someone like Nick Saban. Obviously, when you hear the successful coaches like Coach Sark at Texas or Coach Kemp, anybody who's come from that Nick Saban tree. They all talk about his attributes that they've created. But again, they're not trying to run their program like Nick Saban because Nick Saban is Nick Saban. And Lane Kiffin is Lane Kiffin, and Steve Sarkisian is Steve Sarkisian. But at the end of the day, I think those programs that try to be who they're not and not work, play to their strengths. I think that was a big thing too. That going back to Kentucky, I think that was a big thing that we saw at Kentucky being able to do what they did in Oxford on the road because historically Kentucky's not a great team on the road. They don't play well. But Mark Stoops, what did he do? He went a little bit out of his comfort zone, but he played to his strengths. He didn't try to overdo it or rethink the game plan because he was playing Ole Miss. He just did what he knew that his team could do at a high caliber level and make it work for them. Same thing what Ole Miss has done. Lane Kiffin's not out there trying to reinvent Ole Miss. He's just
No.
trying to make the culture better and play to what they have, going out there and recruiting need and filling need and adapting and adjust.
Well, and when Kentucky beat Ole Miss at Ole Miss, it was the first time since 1978 that it happened. So that was pretty
No,
huge.
exactly. No, it's a huge win for Kentucky. But again, I think a lot of people, there was a lot of Ole Miss fans upset. How could it be Kentucky? But again, you have to give credit to that Kentucky defense. Um, but again, Kentucky's not seen. Even I think Kentucky was still seen as the Kentucky of 5 to 7 years ago. But that defense could hang with a lot of people. We saw it against Georgia. We saw it against South Carolina. So that's why this game this past week was one that really scared me because, I felt like if Ole Miss didn't make that adaptment and adjustment quickly, that we were going to have another tough week against Kentucky because again, Kentucky found a way to limit Jackson Dart, which we rarely see. Trey Harris was our go-to guy because he was the only guy that was open often at times because Kentucky defense did such a good job on eliminating and winning those one-to-ones on that man coverage that Jackson Dart, as comfortable as he feels with Trey Harris, and as we know as clutch as Trey Harris, they weren't able to do what they always do. And that made it difficult too on that Ole Miss offense in Jackson Dart. But we definitely saw a much more improved offense as far as ball as spreading the ball out and ball distribution in South Carolina, which we saw in week one and in week four. It just wasn't against an SEC team. So I think there was a lot of good points and a lot of lots of good points. But as you get closer, you're always going to have sour points. When you're playing a game, no team can play flawless. But each week I think as a ball coach or anything, you just want to make sure that you clean it up because as you get deeper, even though we're not playing Alabama, even though we're not playing, we still have a long schedule ahead of us. And every game is, counts, especially with the playoff team, especially playing in the SEC.
Yeah, and a very underrated rivalry that not a whole lot of people talk about. Like we talk about it, you and I do, but like not everybody's really thinking about this game. The Ole Miss LSU rivalry, the Magnolia Bowl, a game changer in the SEC race. And Ole Miss has not beaten LSU since 2008 in Baton Rouge. Now,
Yeah. No, I was looking at, like you said, one coach likes water and one coach likes Coke, and Lane and Coach Kelly do a really good job of trolling. But I mean, we were talking about some of the historical Magnolia Bowls. You mentioned, Les Miles, not that in 2009, with not watching the play clock, and man, sometimes not watching that play clock can do you in. What I think I was reading, like it's been the overall record at LSU is 2010. They've gone 10-4, and they lead the series against Ole Miss. And then since 2000, they've gone 65-6 in night games. Baton Rouge, Death Valley. There's a reason I know they call Clemson Death Valley, but if you've never taught a game in Death Valley, the real Death Valley, at 6:30 at night with the Bayou Bengals, whoever they're playing, that stadium is just ridiculous. If they thought South Carolina is a tough place to play in, but that was a 2:30 kickoff. It's nothing compared to what we're going to see, against LSU, like in one of the most underrated rivalries for sure.
well, and if Ole Miss doesn't win against LSU in Baton Rouge for the first time since '08, we've got the rest of the 2024 season for the Rebels. Oklahoma, I think they're a little tougher than they look. Arkansas, it's tough winning in Fayetteville. It's been quite a while since Ole Miss has won there.
Yeah,
Georgia,
yeah, no. You make a perfect Arkansas. No matter how good or not so good Arkansas is, I mean, we saw it against Tennessee. We saw what they were able to do, and Tennessee similar to what we do on offense. I mean, Tennessee was, and they were able to limit Nico. And granted, Nico is a young quarterback, but he's been so clutch all season long, and they really did a great job. So yeah, I do believe this LSU game is going to be a playoff elimination game. I do believe whoever loses here, it's going to be really difficult, and a lot of teams that are a lot higher up would have to lose in order for whoever loses this game to be able to make it into the playoffs. I really do believe that this week 7 matchup in this Magnolia Bowl is going to be clutch for whichever team. And there's a lot that's going to have to be done for sure. But I do believe that this is an elimination game for either one of these teams. I just find it really difficult for a 2-loss team, even with the schedule that we have remaining, to make it to the playoffs. Because, like I said, a lot of teams would have to lose, and I don't foresee it happening to make the playoffs.
Well, in the Georgia Bulldogs, the Rebels always have a hard time with them. I mean, you can't beat them in Athens, obviously, but it's been a difficult time since Kirby became the head coach of Georgia. I mean, yeah, Ole Miss beat them in 2016, but that was it, I believe.
And then we saw how close Kentucky was able to keep it with Georgia as
Yeah.
well. So again, but I do like Georgia being later for us. I believe that with us being able to have a bye week coming off those games and then hitting that Arkansas play and everything, I really do believe that it was difficult for Ole Miss to get better and readjust quicker against Kentucky because we had 4 weeks of they're not cupcake games, but again, you have to, like I said earlier, they're games that you have to schematically prepare differently for because those are not SEC playbooks. Those are not SEC opponents that you're playing. They completely run different stuff and they have different strengths, and it's not like playing an SEC team. So yeah, this like I said, this week 7, a lot of big games happening. But I do believe that this LSU Ole Miss game, especially for Ole Miss, I mean, a loss here, I don't believe would get them where they want to be in the playoffs, just because a lot of things would happen. Same could be said for LSU. So this is going to be a marquee matchup, and it's going to be a tough one, nonetheless. So it's and you want to have confidence in both teams, but again, in a rivalry like this, I always say that both teams bring strengths to the thing, and they bring weaknesses. But with this kind of rivalry that dates back so far, there's just so many um, untangibles that don't have to do with football that could change this game and shift this game.
Yeah, and I think one thing that could work in Ole Miss's favor is LSU's defense. Yeah.
No, exactly. Like you said, and with Harold Perkins being out and all that kind of stuff, I mean, that star kid and everything, I think that, Ole Miss leads the country in sacks with 24. LSU's only given up 2 sacks. That's going to be another key battle that I think that we're going to have to see who's going to win that one. Something's got to give. And like I said, I think it's going to be a deep. We know that both these offenses can perform. We know that the offenses are going to have to put numbers on the board. It's just a question of who gets there, who controls the ball. I do hope to see that we continue that. The way we did in South Carolina, but we amp it up as far as a ball distribution. I do believe that was a better play calling on Charlie Weiss and Lane Kiffin's call. Being able, we have so much depth. We need to utilize it. Trey Harris, we're not sure if he's going to be back. I'm okay with Trey Harris not being back and getting him rested, especially when we have to go on the road at Arkansas, especially when we have to play Georgia down the road. But again, we have so many key top players on offense. I think that us being able, when we go against LSU, that we're going to have to hit them with different looks, meaning that sometimes we're going to have to use the running back. We're going to have to be strong on our run game. I would like to see more of our tight ends being used in more, and of course using different receivers. I think by being able to spread the ball out, but also keep Kelly guessing and keeping that defense on its toes. I really do think that this is going to come down at a true SEC classic. It's going to come down to defenses trying to keep these offenses off their game. And I think we'll see a lot, especially from LSU. If I'm LSU, I'm going to try to do what Arkansas did to Nico. Is I'm going to try to put pressure. I'm going to try to keep Jackson Dart from finding. I'm going to put strong man-to-man coverage, but I'm going to try to get Jackson Dart settled. I need to put him in under pressure because we have so many targets, but we saw in that Kentucky game, Jackson Dart was very limited because the coverage was so good. He had no other choice but to go to Trey Harris. So I wouldn't be surprised if LSU does something similar to that in this game to try to get Jackson Dart to be limited. But I do believe that we're really going to have to rely on a balance in the RPOs, whether it be on the pass, on the run game, but especially I would like to see more of the ball game and the run game and continue to see that ball distribution we saw in South Carolina, but amp it up times 10.
Well, and after going all of the strengths and weaknesses and all the notes for Ole Miss LSU, what is your score prediction for this game?
I haven't quite got there. I haven't quite got there. I don't tend to go with score predictions. I'm more of on the line. I think the line opened up at 2.5. We knew that it's going to be a very slim margin. I think we've gone up to 3.5. I like this game. I think it's going to be a very underscoring game. And again, it depends how it shows up. So I like Ole Miss. I like Ole Miss in this one, but again, it could go either way. And the reason I say this is because the turnovers, penalties, and the secondary. I think the secondary really came out last week. Centarian Perkins, man, even though Princely was out, we have a lot of depth, and kudos to Centarian Perkins for really stepping up in his position. I think that that's been another asset that Ole Miss has. We have so much depth in both sides of the ball, and I can't stress that enough. I think we need to continue to utilize that. I think that for the first time in a long time, we're able to have so many playmakers that we can utilize. And I really think that our front seven, our offensive line play was so much better than we did against Kentucky. It improved in South Carolina, and that offensive line is going to be key in helping Jackson Dart do what he needs to do. And I think we saw a much better improved offensive line. So like I said, I like it to go both ways. But again, LSU, and then you go back to talking about LSU. Their offensive line is good at pass blocking, but they're not so good at run blocking. So I think that it's going to come down to turnover battles. But I think another key thing that we're going to see is who's going to win those third and downs, who's going to win those third down conversions. I've been saying it over and over, and I can't stress it enough. I think that that's going to be a marquee moment for which team. I they don't be surprised if LSU again in that defense is going to try. We saw Jackson Dart in some difficulty in getting in those third and longs. We cannot do that this week and match that with penalties. So I believe a big, big key component for the Ole Miss Rebels is going to be able to convert more in third and downs. We saw against Kentucky, we saw in South Carolina those fourth down situations. I understand the analytics and all that, but again, we really, really have to do a better job of winning the turnover battle. But I can't stress enough, those third down conversions are going to be key in the matchup because it's going to be so close. It's going to be so down to the wire. And I do believe a lot of, we saw a lot of plays, against South Carolina that, were questionable in calls and everything. But that's another story for another day. But again, that storyline that we had in South Carolina is definitely not going to be the storyline for this week in LSU.
Well, I'll go ahead and make a prediction for this one, and I think this year will be the first time since 2008 that Ole Miss finally wins in Baton Rouge, 31-28 against LSU. But there's one thing I couldn't hear in this conversation. LS who?
Exactly. Again, it's gonna be a tough matchup, and the Rebels aren't going to be able to amp down. We can I always say we can talk about the stats everybody played
Oh,
last week, how good Centarian Perkins played. Of course, Walter Nolan, you can't help but talk about that defensive line with talking about Walter Nolan, defensive player of the week, of the month, of the year. That kid, was one of the best acquisitions we got when he was from the transfer portal. So thank you, Lane Kiffin, for continuing being the portal king and bringing players like Walter Nolan to Ole Miss. However, like I said, the Rebels have so much depth, and I think that we're going to continue to see that. What we saw in South Carolina, I think, was the Rebels that we're accustomed to seeing. And I think from all the teams that we've had since Lane Kiffin's tenure here at Ole Miss, this is by far the deepest team. And I continue, why not use our assets? Why not change it up? And I think that that's what we saw a little bit of South Carolina. I expect us to see more of that, especially being at LSU. That's a heck of a place to play. It's not easy to play, but I don't see this being as much as these offense, especially we know Jackson Dart can put up the numbers. We know that Lane Kiffin and his offense can put up those video game. But again, at the end of the day, it's about winning a ball game, and I do believe that Lane Kiffin will go and make some in Lane Kiffin fashion. He will do some plays. He will keep it exciting. But again, this is a game for the Ole Miss Rebels that they really, really, really are going to have to focus on not having penalties. Penalties have been a thorn on their side. They did a lot better job at South Carolina cleaning up those penalties, being more aware, situational awareness, field awareness, all those little things. However, that atmosphere, it's going to be a lot more difficult not to be unsettled in a place like Death Valley at night. And then again, like I said, who can convert those third downs. I really believe that we've seen so many games, even outside the SEC, come within with the field goal range. I do believe, and you got to end those drives. Like I always say, it doesn't matter, controlling the clock, and then ending every drive with some kind of points. And we've seen so many matchups, in the past 6 weeks, Jackson, that have come down to field goals. Even in the NFL, it's ridiculous. And I do believe that in a game like this, if it's this low scoring, that don't be surprised that special teams will play a very vital role, more so than we've seen it in week 1 through 6.
Well, and I was thinking about the 2025 NFL draft, and I think the Browns have a first round quarterback. Not first round quarterback. They have a first round pick finally for 2025. I'm hoping that they're just like, you know what, we're tired of the Deshaun Watson route. I'm wondering if the Browns are gonna consider drafting Jackson Dart, or if we're gonna see the Raiders, or uh, you know, I just don't know who we're gonna see looking at for the 2025 draft. Like, because there's gonna be a lot of teams looking for Jackson Dart. There's gonna be a lot of them looking.
No doubt. And you can't help but talk about Jackson Dart, in regardless of the performance he had at Kentucky. Overall, his performance as a quarterback, what he can do, uh, you know, uh, on the ground or in the air is nothing short of phenomenal. He can break records, and his composure, and then the kind of athlete that you get off the field, a real leader and all that kind of stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised that a lot of teams are going to come knocking. But again, what you got to love about Jackson Dart, he's a team guy. He's a leader, and his focus right now is on trying to get the Rebels to an SEC championship and hopefully to a playoff berth. And, even a natty, like he said, when they were talking about him, when he was on, Jim Rome, he wasn't concerned about the Heisman. He was there, that's the kind of guy you want to have in your backfield. And that's the guy you want to protect and you want to go with, when he's like, I'm not really, I got a natty on my mind, not talking about the Heisman, just talks about how selfless, how selfless he is when it comes to, raining on this thing. And, a kid like Jackson could have gone to the NFL early. He didn't have to come back, but a lot of players that I think this is something we don't see, or we talk a lot about what Lane Kiffin's done and the culture he's created. There was a lot of kids, that could have hit the portal. There was a lot of kids who could have declared for the draft, but they decided to stay because they know what kind of development they can get at Ole Miss. And this is not just tooting the what Lane Kiffin and his what he does there at here in Oxford, what he does at Ole Miss, he runs this program like an NFL program. These guys know that they're going to be, whether or not their dreams or aspirations are going to the NFL. They know if they're going to be whatever position that they're going to be, that they have the opportunity, to make it at the next level. And I think just the way he runs his program and how he's done it, even the NFL model that he's using there has been successful, not just on the recruiting trail, but in the way he creates the culture, how he treats and utilizes his players. And I think that that's a really underrated thing, that why a lot of people that could leave. We saw a lot, perfect example like Jared Ivey. He stayed at Ole Miss, and he did a lot, in the summer, to be a better player and to be a better athlete. And we see a lot of athletes that were doing that under Lane Kiffin. They, like I said, they could have walked out the door, they could have gone and transferred to another school, they could have chased the bag, but they chose not to, because they know what Lane Kiffin is doing and his coaching staff is something real. And if you want to really get developed and you want to be a better player, similar to what Jackson Dart, I mean, he was already a great quarterback coming in, and when we got him and transferred, but he had a lot of growth. And what we've seen from Jackson Dart from this year to last year, definitely a lot of growth, a lot of maturity. So you can't help but think that that's the kind of player that you want, not only to represent the Heisman. I mean, the Heisman, you can say what it wants, but it's got its own political strains. But Jackson Dart, I mean, a player on and off the field. I mean, not only is he putting up numbers and records and doing it so humbly, but like I said, the kind of leader he is off the field, and when you hear about him, when you talk to him, when you hear his fellow teammates talk about him, coaches, that's the kind of kid that you want to win your Heisman. But again, in humbling fashion, he's not concerned about that. He's concerned about helping this team, finally do something that they've been working so hard, generations, to be able to bring home to Oxford. And like I said, a lot of hurdles, a lot of things along the way, but I think this is one of the most complete teams that Ole Miss has seen. And you got to thank Lane Kiffin. But again, this is not something that's built overnight. This is not something that a big paycheck can buy. It's taken a lot of blood, sweat, and tears from the staff that doesn't go unnoticed. So when fans will be fans, but I always say when you want to criticize coaches and things like that, think of where this program has come and where it's built. And like I said, there's a real shot. It's no longer just a in the rear view. This team could do something. And I don't know about you, but wins and toughs, wins are great, but losses teach lessons. And I really, I was talking to some people, this is not a bad thing that Ole Miss lost. I think if we would have gone with a lot more wins deeper into the season and got a loss later in the season, I think that could have affected us a lot different. I mean, not so long ago when there was that whole mess that we had a great season run, and then all that mess with Auburn, and that jibber jabber if Lane was going to go to, that was just an example, of just how easily that something that's off the field can affect how your team plays. Look at how we played in that bowl game, in that Egg Bowl game. We fell apart because it wasn't so much about the football, but it was about the all the outside stuff that was trickling down into the team. But again, like I said, there's still a lot of ball to be playing, and you can expect that this is going to be a tough atmosphere. Lane Kiffin is not going to go into this lightly, and he shouldn't go into this lightly. But I think that the Rebels we saw in South Carolina adapted and adjusted well. Still a lot to be cleaned up. But again, they're gonna, it's just at this point, it's about the little details. It's about cleaning up, and just showing out.
Well, I will say from what we've seen of Jackson Dart, I really hope he doesn't get drafted by the Panthers because I mean it's like that's bad karma to a good kid. Like what did he do to
Oh, I
deserve?
know.
It's like
No, I
David.
know. It's just no, exactly. No, I know. Maybe he'll go to my. Who knows where he's going to go? Maybe he'll be a Dallas Cowboy. The Dallas Cowboys sure could use someone like that. But like you said, I will say any NFL team who's lucky enough to get a kid like Jackson Dart, regardless, like I said, the kid is the epitome of what you want,
Yeah,
leading your team on that
I
offense. Like I said,
really. Oh yeah, I really hope the Dolphins, like, if they get him, they better not do him like they did Tua Tagovailoa. It's like I get
no, I
so
know.
mad about what they
No,
done to it.
yeah,
It's like I mean
yeah,
the 2024 concussion this year, that was bad. The
yeah.
2022 concussion on where he had his hand like that, I was like, no, 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 don't do that to him.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's another one thing that you love to hear and you love to see about you hear so much about the positive things that go on Ole Miss and why people want to come to the SIP. And but a lot of the times when you talk to recruits and you talk to their families, one of the things you that they tell me and they share with me, they love the fact that Lane Kiffin and the coaches that are recruiting them, they're so real. Football's important and all that kind of stuff, but they really do care about the athletes. And I think we see that, with Coach Kiffin and his staff really, really making sure that these guys are out there. He's not putting them out there when he knows that they're injured. He's giving them time to rest, and I think that's something that just attests to that. Lane Kiffin is concerned about winning ball games. Let's not get that wrong. But at the end of the day, he wants to make sure that his players are healthy. He wants to make sure that his guys are taken care of. And it's a good thing to see that a coach is so vocal about not just the physical well-being of their athletes and making sure they're taken care of, but since he's gotten there, the mental health of those athletes. So that's another big thing I think that we don't talk about that Lane Kiffin is doing right, is that he's making sure that his athletes are getting nurtured. He could put Trey Harris out there if he really wanted to, because we know that a player like Trey Harris is got that mentality. I just think it's conditioning them that they want to play because they want to help their team. But at the end of the day, he's making the right call. If he's not ready, he's not ready. Like he said in the presser, if we were to play today, Trey's not going to be out there. And that just goes to show that, he's really nurturing and taking care of, his players and his athletes. And like I said, I talk to recruits, everybody loves the party and the sip. Everybody loves the show that is the SEC and the pageantry. You can't help but there's no place and you can attest to that. There's no place like sitting in a stadium in the SEC. There's just something about it that just is so different. The culture, no matter what school you're at, there's something about every SEC school that just that just stands out. But at the end of the day, players, especially the mamas out there, they talk about that when they go to Oxford, they love that the care and the compassion that is often not talked about, or that we don't see in the foot that we don't see vocally enough coaches say, like Lane Kiffin expresses, because of that demasculinity or kind of thing. But that's what I think is another important thing why these players really step up week in and week out, and along with this coaching staff, because they know that he's willing to stick up for them, stand up for them, but to make sure that they're not going to be put out on field or put in danger.
Yeah. I really hope the Dolphins take a page from Lane Kiffin because I mean I know I would. And
Yeah.
there's one oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, no, I was gonna say the same thing. There's a lot of things that people should take for Lane Kiffin, from his social media presence to his culture care. But like I said, he's a really dynamic coach, and the coaches he has there too, really dynamic. They've had done a lot of unsung heroes. But again, it takes a village, and the Ole Miss Rebels have a pretty damn good village, I'd say, going into LSU, into the swamp, to Death Valley this weekend.
Oh yeah. And apparently Wake Forest didn't like that beating they had on the CW, so they were like, "You know what? We're gonna get rid of this 2025 game. We're good." So guess who replaces Wake Forest? Washington State.
Washington State. I know that's going to be an interesting game. 2025 Washington State. But hey, that's another game you just never can know. Look at what Washington did. When you play teams like that, you just never know. You can't let your guard down. So that's going to be an exciting matchup. Glad to see the Rebels were able to find an opponent. But yeah, so, sorry for Wake Forest that you got your feelings hurt on homecoming. But hey, we got our feelings hurt a little bit on homecoming too with that loss against Kentucky. So but again, you got to rebound and readjust. And if I had to pick any team to adapt and adjust really well, not just being an Ole Miss homer, but it's got to be the Rebels. Like I said, you just kind of have to. And I think Lane Kiffin and his staff and his players are really good. And after that loss against Kentucky, Jackson Dart again attesting to the kind of leader he is, pulled in his offense and talked. And I think everybody just shaked it off. I know there was some angry fans and upset, and of course you're going to be angry and upset, but this is what happens in the SEC. This is when you're playing big time ball, as I like to call it. You want to sit at the big boy table? Well, then you're gonna have to muscle up and that kind of stuff. And that's what you do. Like, we can talk about what happened in Kentucky until we're blue in the face. We can talk about what happened in South Carolina, but that storyline, like I say every week, Centurion Perkins had a hell of a game. Walter Nolan had a hell of a game. But what I love about the Ole Miss Rebels, and I love that we haven't had in such a long time, and this is going to be a strength, is the depth that we have, because this week it's going to be another set of players. And I think that as we progress through the season, it's great to hear other names called, because that means that you got a lot of playmakers, you got a lot of go-to guys. When you got a lot of go-to guys, especially in the trenches, I can't say that enough. When Lane Kiffin went out there and his staff, Pete Golding, Randall Joyner, they went out there and they got those all. You know, Coach Garrison got out there and recruited us some size and some power on those offensive and defensive line. That has been a big game changer. I do believe, early on the season when I was talking with Mark, I really do believe that the unsung heroes are your linemen. I don't think the big guys up front, whether you're talking about defense or offense, they get enough credit. But in order for Jackson Dart to be able to pull off, whether he's going to pass it, whether he's going to run it down, or get it to his guys, there's got to be that protection up front, and
Yeah.
that becomes with the O line. And that was a big problem, I believe, that Ole Miss had for so many years. Is we had a lot of talent. There was no doubt we were wide receiver you, we're running back you, but we didn't have that size and that power up front on both sides of the ball. To protect our quarterbacks and also to stop, opposing offenses to be able to get through. And I think that when Lane Kiffin went out there and his coaching staff saw that need, that void, those guys have been the unsung heroes in keeping this well-oiled machine going. And like I said, that defensive front, I mean, top in the country with all the sacks that they're doing. Heck, even with that less than stellar performance against Kentucky, even after that week, they were still the number one defense in the country. And again, the thing about it is the Ole Miss Rebels, week in and week out, we have a lot of key players, but I think for the first time also, our playbook doesn't evolve just around a set of star players. It evolves around about, he's gone out there and recruited young talent, veteran talent, transfer talent. We can plug and play just like you would in the NFL, a lot of different guys at a lot of different positions, and they can be successful and they can capitalize and they can make that playbook flow. And I think too, for that's what's helped Ole Miss in their endurance. Because if you've looked at any Ole Miss games or you've been an Ole Miss Rebel fan, you know that sometimes we haven't been good, closing a game. We'll go really all gas first 2 quarters, and then the gas is just too much. Now I do think that we'll definitely have to keep the gas going. We saw, you know, against South Carolina. And that's just a test to adapting and adjusting from that South Carolina defense. We didn't put too many points on the board. What was it? I believe it was like 3 points or so in that second half. That definitely can't happen this week. That's just not something. It's going to be a low scoring game. We know that the defense, but again, we're going to have to, Jackson Dart is going to have to find a way not to be able, and that offense is going to have to get things going. Are we going to have to put, violent video game numbers? Heck no, we don't have to do that, but we got to control that game. And I'm going to go back to it. That's why I really believe that I'm a fan of the run game. I think that we have such a strong run game and we got so many assets. We got to utilize that. And why I love the run game is because, at any given time, you're controlling the ball game, you're eating up clock. And as long as you're getting down there where you can get close enough, hey, even if it's field goal range, you got to always end it in points. And I do believe that if we can do that and we can wear down that LSU defense, that'll be another key thing. But again, my keys to the game aren't anything, really difficult for Ole Miss. It's going to be, like I said, keep controlling that clock and making sure that they convert on their third down. That's the must win. Those third down conversion limiting penalties. And again, LSU's got to put pressure on Dart and they got to get them in third and long. So I feel like the storyline in this game is going to be about those third downs. What situation either team is going to get them. And it's going to come down to defense. And I think it's going to be a low scoring game.
Well, it's going to be a tremendous game and another tremendous chapter of the Magnolia Bowl. And before we go, I don't think I did ask you your favorite games from the Magnolia Bowl rivalry. What were your favorite games from there?
I Well, it's kind of interesting. I like that 2009 LSU with LS Miles and the time clock because it's just those little things that you never think about, time management. But it just goes to show, as a coach, if you put yourself in that position, there's just so much intensity. There's just so many things that you wouldn't think that a thing like the time, like the clock, like that you would be aware, situational awareness. But like I say, as good as both these teams are, that's just a perfect example how a lot of those things that a coach should have, in lockdown, those coaches should be aware of, go out the door because there's just so much intensity, like I said, in such a rivalry. And this really is one of the most underrated rivals. And it's going to be, I do believe, an elimination match. For LSU or for Ole Miss, I just don't believe that a two-loss team, especially in the SEC, is going to make it into the playoffs if they lose. So this is going to be an even tense battle. But again, I do like where the Rebels stand on this one. LSU got to give it to them because, like I said, everyone thought at the beginning the way LSU performed, it was another dumpster fire. Everybody was upset at Kelly, but again, in true LSU fashion, they made a turnaround. And Ole Miss, is coming off a tough. We're going to hear that Kentucky loss forever. It's just that we could go the rest of the season and not lose a game, but we're always going to hear about losing to Kentucky. But
Well,
again, that's the game.
Florida heard so much about that Ole Miss loss in '08, but guess what? They got better afterwards.
Exactly, and I really do believe what we've seen here, and I think that the Rebels are back on SEC time. They've clocked in, and they're not in Margaritaville anymore. And I really believe that what we saw in South Carolina was more of the Ole Miss Rebels that we're going to see in LSU. But I really think it's going to be a lot more intensified. So it's going to be an exciting game to watch. I'm really glad that there's a night game. I feel like the energy is going to be great. And I just think the game plan is going to keep it simple. It's just going to. I really do believe though it's going to come down to two clashing defenses trying to keep two high-powered offenses. Because at the end of the day, you can ride on the shoulders of your defense, but at the end of the day, it's going to be the scoreboard. It's going to be whether it's 3 points or a touchdown or whoever makes it. It's going to be whoever can put most points on the board and whoever's going to do it quicker. And I think that a key thing is when we're talking about offenses, which quarterback can control this game enough to wear out a defense, but at the same time get his offense down there quickly enough to be able to put some points on that board, every single time. Because, like I said, Ole Miss definitely, as great as Jackson Dart is and great as that offense is, and as many explosive power players we have, we're going to have to put more than 3 points up in a second half to be able to get it across LSU come Saturday night in Death Valley.
Well, I'll be pulling for those Rebels to beat up on LSU. And for those who want to get your expertise on the Ole Miss Rebels, where can they find you?
Well, they can always find us talking Cruden and more at therebelwalk.com. We also have a lot of great staff writers that do awesome post game shows. Zach and Cam also have a really good post game shows. Of course, our publisher Evie, who does an amazing job getting up all our stuff. So, like I said, Rebel fans, you want to talk about not just Ole Miss football, but other things that are going on in the Grove Collective, NIL, anything. Catch us at rebelwalk.com. If you want to talk a little bit about Louisville and Kentucky football, I also do a show every Saturday. I talk a little bit more about betting and national games on that one. You can catch us on Wake Up 502, 96.1 out of Louisville, Kentucky, and Indianapolis. So that's where you can catch me. It's been so great being on the show. And special thanks to Jackson for having me on, but also thanks for all the work you do helping our Ole Miss Live channel. Remember, catch us every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern. Mark and I, and all the great stuff you do for us. We're building that channel. A lot of exciting things coming. So you can catch us there on the Voice of College Football Network as well every Wednesday at 2.
Well, I'm always going to be making sure to tell everybody to tell the friends, the family, and the cashiers at Publix about Ole Miss Live every.
Oh, I
Is
love
it?
that. I love
It's
that.
still.
Thank
It's still
you.
every. Is it every Thursday or is it every Wednesday?
We were doing Thursday, but we're moving back to Wednesday. So tune in tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 o'clock Central. We'll have another full breakdown of LSU. We'll talk a little bit about South Carolina and look ahead to. We'll also be talking a little bit about what's going on around the SEC tomorrow.
Well, the link will be in the chat for sure, which I'll be making
Thank you.
sure to tell everybody. Let's get Ole Miss at the Voice College Football to thousands of subs. And of course, you can find all these episodes of the Jacksonian on Jackson Johnson 979 on YouTube, where I'm 123 subs away on YouTube. I'm gonna need all the help I can get to the magic number 500 and the magic number 1000. Need all the help I can get there. And you can also find some of the episodes of the Jacksonian on Jackson VOCFB on X. And of course, I also put my updates on there and on Jackson Johnson 543908 on Instagram and Threads. And you can find what I'm doing on Alabama at the Voice of College Football, where Johnny Burts and I bring you our take on the Alabama Crimson Tide throughout the week and the post game show. And I've got some rowdy friends coming up for more stuff on Alabama with the Voice of College Football, including the 7th edition of Crimson Tide Live, where I have Alan Cole join us from Gamecock Scoop at Rivals, giving us his take on the Alabama South Carolina matchup. Plus, he gives his take from South Carolina Ole Miss, what happened there, and you see Johnny and I having a little bit of a venting session about Alabama Vanderbilt, if you will. So, with that being said, y'all have a pleasant evening and stay safe, stay cool. It's hot out. Take
Hi,
care,
Johnny.
everybody.